Joe and Love's relationship is one of the most complex relationships in the show because they are a reflection of each other. They both have abandonment issues and disorganized attachment, so neither of them experiences love in a secure and stable way. Instead, it becomes intertwined with fear, control, and violence. The main psychological aspect they both share, which makes them incredibly similar and a mirror to each other, is that they're both afraid of being abandoned. Joe's response to this fear is to find someone new to idolize and obsess over, because he is afraid of real life. Therefore, he prefers to live in an idolized fantasy, which is why he can never stop obsessing over someone new. He never falls in love with the real person. He is always falling in love with the idea of them. All the women he loves are just his patterns. On the other hand, Love's reaction to this fear of abandonment is desperately trying to keep their relationship intact. And by doing so, she goes to extreme lengths, such as murder. So Joe's reaction is emotional withdrawal, while Love's is jealousy and desperation. The second aspect they share is that they both confuse love with possession. Joe changes his behavior to fit the idea of the perfect boyfriend for Love. And Love also does this because she wants him to choose her completely and permanently. They both hide their darkest aspects in fear that they will be abandoned. But when they do reveal who they truly are, they find out they're exactly a reflection of each other. Another similar trait they share is that they don't think they're bad people, and they always think their actions are justified. Both of them are actually very empathetic people. They're not simply cold-blooded murderers. But once someone becomes an obstacle to their goals, their feelings take over to extreme levels. However, they have a great difference that in the end separates them. They could have been soulmates and lived together happily, and in an ideal world, the show could have finished in season 2 and they settled down together happily. However, the problem is that Joe loves longing more than having. He is addicted to the chase, the thrill of the beginning of love. But once reality sets in, it's never enough for him, and he always longs for something else. Love, on the other hand, wants something permanent. She is addicted to keeping love. She desperately wants stability because she never had it. She is always thinking of ways to reinforce their relationship, while Joe is constantly thinking about who is next. Despite them being each other's perfect match, Joe ends up despising her because he does not accept that she reflects back to Joe exactly who he is. Joe's whole identity is a lie. He believes he's a good person, but his actions say otherwise, and love destroys that illusion. Instead of Joe feeling validated and understood by love, he feels extremely exposed, which creates a feeling of resentment towards her, which is, in the end, why they can never work together. People often dislike traits in others that they cannot tolerate in themselves. This is called projection. Something else that Joe hates is that Love knows the real Joe. This is something Joe thinks he wanted. He doesn't like to feel understood by others, but in reality, if people keep misunderstanding him, then he can keep creating an idolized version of himself in his mind. But Love sees who he truly is. And even though she accepts him, that doesn't matter in Joe's eyes. He feels too exposed. Joe starts resenting Love because of the loss of his fantasy. She isn't who he thought she was in the beginning. The deepest irony in the relationship is that Joe spent so much of his life wanting someone to deeply understand and accept him. But once he has that, he cannot handle it, and he emotionally withdraws and moves on to someone new. Joe spends the whole series saying he wants someone to understand him, but what he actually wants is someone to see him in the same idolized way that he sees himself. He doesn't actually want someone to see the real him because that would break his fantasy. Joe cannot continue hiding behind the role of the good guy because someone else has seen who he is. In the end, it all comes down to his sense of identity. He has spent his whole life lying to himself and creating an idolized version of himself. So when someone reflects back to him his own actions, he cannot handle that because his whole sense of self collapses. Love makes it impossible for him to ignore that part of himself that he wants to keep hidden. And as a result, Joe starts to reject her. Another interesting angle is that, in a way, Joe is also kind of obsessed with redemption, but he can never actually fully reach it. We see a pattern. Every new relationship represents a fresh start in his mind. Every time he obsesses over a woman, he convinces himself that this time it's different. This time it's real love. He wants to be a better person, but he just can't. The problem is that he's never internally changing. He's just changing the subject of his obsession. There is also a psychoanalytic aspect that I think is very interesting, which is called the Madonna whore complex, created by Sigmund Freud. This concept describes someone who struggles to see a person as both idolized and fully human. The Madonna represents someone pure, innocent, and ideal, while the whore represents someone who is flawed, or imperfect, or tainted. This fits Joe because he never falls in love with the real version of the woman. He falls in love with the pure, idealized version he wants to see. Like when he meets love, he convinces himself that she is everything he has ever wanted. She is his true love, and that his life is now complete. But when he finds out who she truly is, his fantasy collapses, and suddenly he despises her and rejects her. As soon as she stops fitting the role in his mind, his feelings change. At first, love fits the role of the Madonna because she's warm and nurturing and wants a family and stability. But when he finds out she's capable of murder, manipulation, she becomes the whore because his idolization collapses. So the problem with their relationship is not that love is a murderer as well. It's that her being one destroys Joe's fantasy and he cannot accept that. I think their dynamic is one of the most interesting because they are both complex and act as foil characters to each other. It's interesting to see throughout this series how they bring out the best in each other but also the worst in each other. This was my analysis of Joe and Love's relationship. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Bye.